Good morning, how's it going? This idea, like many a YouTube art video, started on Pinterest. I've been coming across these poseable sculptures, probably better known as art dolls, and I wanted to finally get around to making one. So without any more waffling, let's get started. This is aluminium wire that I'm going to use for the armature. This will essentially serve as the bones for the sculpture. I'm starting with the hands, making 3 fingers and a thumb slightly off to the side and a wee bit shorter. I used some tape to reinforce the joints. This is more to keep the wire together while I'm handling it than for structural stability. These hands won't be weight bearing, so they don't need to have a particularly strong armature, it just has to look like a hand. The most important part is the wrist wires, as these will be the connection to the rest of the body and where the movement for the joints will be. I use tinfoil to bulk out the hands to keep them as light as possible, and then I cover them with an initial layer of clay. The clay I'm using is Super Sculpting Original. I use my own hand as a reference to see where the palm needs to be bulked out. I add lumps of clay where I see fit until I'm happy, and then I move around to the back side of the hand. The knuckles start as balls of clay which are blended out with a ball stylus. I cut out tiny sections where the bends of the fingers would be with an X-Acto blade, then add the wrist bones and then go back to add bigger knuckles along the top of the hand. The last details to add are the lines across the palm and down the wrist and, of course, the fingernails. I push down with the flat of a sculpting tool to round out the cuticles and then cut in with the same tool around the front to form the tip of the nail. The second hand was made in exactly the same way, just mirrored off camera. This is the same wire I used for the hands, except I've wound 2 lengths around one another to make them stronger. I cut a length for the spine and then for the shoulders, rewinding the wire to make sure the shoulders stay in place. I measured out the arm length next. I want this sculpture to be quite lanky, with long arms and legs but big hands and feet. The main focus was to ensure the joints function properly, so I tested everything as I went. I haven't done this before and I didn't watch any videos, so I was problem solving as I went, but eventually I worked out how to get everything secure and functional. With the same wire again, you'll see it a lot on this channel. I curve it around to make the base of the foot. I make sure to leave some excess so the calf and the ankle are not too short. It's easy to trim the wire, but it's not so easy to add more. After the inevitable foil is added, an initial layer of clay is added too. These feet will be in permanent shoes, so that's the shape I'm going for. I use a sharp edge tool to score in the sole of the shoe around the base, then move on to the bottom. I add the tread, just making shapes up as I go. I'm thinking about using the square in the middle to add the date to the sculpture. A line of clay is added and blended in to make the top edge of the shoe. Another line, higher up, is added to delineate the sock from the ankle. This is detailed with the same sharp edge tool as the soles. I then add a strap over it and then spend an inordinate amount of time trying to persuade tiny lines of clay into a buckle shape. I do, however, think it was worth it. I make a second foot in much the same way off camera again. The body is next. I knew I wanted it to be soft despite the metal armature, and I've seen that a lot of the pictures had a stuffed body underneath the clothes, so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm using felt to do this. I use the armature to sort of guess how big to make it, and then I pin the edges of the felt together so they line up after I've sewn them. I leave the top and the bottom open so I can slip the fabric over the wire and then sew along the top and bottom after stuffing the body with some more ancient material. I left one of the shoulders open so I could do this. The arms and legs also get bulked out with the same felt, as I felt they would be too spindly beneath the future clothes. I do this in the same way by pinning and sewing directly over the wire. Of course, the infamous foil is back out again to make the head. Now, I'm going to skip through this initial attempt, as you'll soon see that I hit problem after problem with it. I didn't spend enough time at the foil stage refining the shape, so once I added the clay, I was playing catch up and trying to fix it from the jump. This inevitably just made me hate it, so at this point I excavated the pre-baked eyes and started again. With the foil re-evaluated and with some wire antlers in the making, I start over with another initial layer of clay. I add the pre-baked eyes, encircling them with a line of clay to blend them into the rest of the face. The nose starts as a blob, blended in with a ball stylus. I add nostrils with a smaller ball stylus and then move on to the mouth area. I seem to struggle the most with mouths, so I'm still floating about in the trial and error phase. Each time I do it a little differently. This time I use a sharp pointed tool to press in where the lips meet and hopefully give him some kind of expression. I add ears next, which start off as a blob of clay that I poke a hole into to form the ear canal. I blend out the back of the ear to ensure that it's properly attached to the head. Texturing is next. This is a largely repetitive process, but I generally find it quite soothing. It's a kind of no-brain activity that, unlike other less productive things like watching rubbish telly, I can actually feel accomplished after doing it. The neck was another story though. Most of the pictures I've seen have the head attached with a neck arch thing. My hope was that I could make the structure how I normally would, with wire and stuff, and it would still fit after baking. So I crossed my fingers and I got to work. After the foil was once again in place, I added clay. Attaching it to the head was a bit of a struggle, but after a wee bit, and by that I mean a lot of poking and prodding and forcing the clay to stick, it finally worked out. I continued the same texture down from the head and then it was in to bake. The clothes were a whole nother level of new for me, and unfortunately, because of the constant struggle that was making them, I didn't record much of the process. But I will try my best to tell you what I did. I measured and cut the pattern with paper first so I didn't waste a bunch of fabric making mistakes. I then pinned the paper pattern onto the fabric and cut around it, leaving a space all the way around. This is called a seam allowance, but in reality I was just scared it was going to be too small, so I erred on the side of caution. Once both sides of the dungarees were cut out, I sewed around all the edges with the pattern side of the fabric facing in. I also sewed over all the edges that weren't attached to the other side, like the arm straps, to make sure the fabric doesn't fray. I added real buttons, which was also one of the things I was most excited about for this project. Don't ask me why, I just love buttons. And then I moved on to the shirt. I found this pattern on Pinterest, which was quite simple, so I thought I could handle it. The sleeves were the most difficult thing to attach, but it was mostly fine. I basically just sew all the edges together to form the shirt, add the collar once the pieces are together, and hem the bottom and front edges to, again, avoid fraying. So after all that, it's painting time. Starting with the socks, I give them a base coat of white. Took a good few coats to make it look opaque. The sole of the shoe gets a grey, followed by a once over with a black for the rest of the shoe. I start with a warm mid-tone brown for the face. I then go in with a lighter shade around the eyes, blending out the further away it gets from them. I decided to add some markings down the front of the chest with the same light colour. I then go in with a darker shade from the crease of the nose upwards and over the nose itself. I add a line down from the nose, aiming for that deer-like look. The ears and eyes are filled with a near black, then I move on to the antlers with the same dark brown from before. I dry brush the antlers with the lighter shade to bring out the ridges and texture I added when sculpting. Moving on to the legs, I use the same base coat brown colour, then take that across the hands as well. I stipple on a few lighter shades across the legs for some variation in the skin, then also do that on the hands as well, mainly focusing on the palms and the knuckles. Once everything is completely dry, I can put them all together again and we can move on to the results. Thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. Also, I haven't chosen a name yet, so if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Thanks again, I hope you have a nice day.